Hello and welcome to another Fantasy Premier League video. My name is Steve and I got a pretty chunky green arrow in game week 24, sending me back up the ranks to where I was sitting, well actually a little bit higher than where I was sitting before the Watkins debacle in game week 23, currently sitting at a rank of about 176k. So just very quickly on the game week 24 rundown, I did get the early team news that KDB was going to be benched for the fixture, but I was more than happy to be playing him. He did in fact come on in the 57th minute, got himself an assist and almost scored a goal with the last kick of the game, which would have actually given KDB another 10-point haul from a substitute appearance. I really wish that goal had have gone in, as it would have got me some very much needed differential points. Elsewhere, I captained Haaland for his brace, pulled in Palmer, Saka's and Gabriel's double-digit hauls, but it was actually Gusto who chipped in with a 4-point assist with a 7% EO that really helped me to gain some pretty hefty rank rises. I also used my one free transfer in game week 24 to bring in Jota for his solitary 5-point goal, but I am now looking at the prospect of selling him immediately. So, enough of last week's returns. This video is all about the options in front of us for double game week 25 and how our moves this week will affect or could affect blank game week 26. And with a certain Egyptian king making a bit of a fuss over on Twitter, his potential return will be the main focus of today's video. So before we get started, if you like the following content, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. So, would you sell Jota for Salah? So Salah was pictured walking out onto the training pitch on Twitter yesterday. Actually, I don't even think it was a picture. I think it was a video from memory, which is sparking interest back into the community. Now, Klopp's last comments on Salah was that he was hoping he'd be a part of parts of training this week. So the fact that we're actually seeing him out on the pitch is in line with what we were told last week. However, the quote was a little bit more informative than that, and with Salah being a pretty robust footballer, if he's anything like Anthony Gordon at Newcastle, we could very well see Salah feature against Brentford in the first game of the double this weekend. So the full quote from Klopp on the 9th of February, about 6 or 7 days ago now, when he was asked about Salah coming back, he said, "We hope, but we don't know. We hope that he can be part of parts of training next week," i.e. this week, but we have to see. He is going through all the phases now, and it's positive. It's either next week or the week after. So it's either this week or the week after. So this led me and many others to believe that it would be unlikely that Salah would feature in the first game of the double against Brentford, and that he would probably be touch and go for the Luton fixture given the short 4-day turnaround between matches. So hence last week I brought Jota into my squad, anticipating that Salah would miss the Brentford fixture entirely, and then he might not even be back for the Luton fixture, meaning that Jota's minutes were about as assured as anything. Now, Jota did come away with a 90 minutes under his belt in game week 24. But we do have to consider what we will do if we hear some more positive news out of Klopp from the press conferences, or if we get some early team leaks. So, first of all, who would I look to sell in order to bring Salah in? Now, I've titled this, Would You Sell Jota for Salah? Because Jota is actually the only real candidate in my particular squad that I would be looking to sell in order to bring Salah in. And selling a double game weeker for a different double game weeker from the same team does seem like a bit of an obscure move at first look, but I will quickly go through my reasoning before we get into whether or not I will actually make the move. So, first of all, a fit again Salah means I have no idea what amount of minutes Jota will get across the double. So holding on to Jota into the double would become a lot more risky. Now, there is obviously every chance that Jota just ends up playing 90 minutes back-to-back in both of these fixtures. In fact, the main reason that I brought Diogo Jota into my squad is I think he has the biggest goal threat in terms of a likely goal conversion. I think Nunez does a lot better on the expected stats and probably gets a few more chances than Jota, but I think Jota's just more likely to put the ball in the back of the net. And I think Klopp probably sees that as well, and so it's probably unlikely that Jota is the man who will make way for Salah, but there is still every chance that Jota could be dropped. So there would be no longer an assurity of minutes if we get any sort of information that Salah is going to be available. So in my squad, there's actually only 3 men in midfield that could make way in order to bring Salah in. So I currently have 5 million in the bank, and that is not enough funds to go from Palmer or Foden, straight up to Salah. I could only do it with De Bruyne, Jota, or Saka. So on KDB, now I have absolutely no plans to be selling KDB, but for those of you out there that are thinking about bringing him into your squad, I will quickly cover what I see as his prospects in terms of minutes across the double, both games at home, to Chelsea and Brentford. Now, I am expecting 2 starts out of De Bruyne, given the opposition of Chelsea and Brentford. So in game week 24, as I mentioned in the intro, Kevin De Bruyne was rested, but I'm pretty sure that was done in order to prioritise him for the Copenhagen match in the Champions League, in which he did start and actually played exceptionally well. He put in a hell of a performance. And I do think that, based on Pep's comments, that he sees Kevin De Bruyne as one of the top 2 players in the City squad. So Chelsea do warrant Pep fielding a very strong team, as they could cause City some issues. I don't think Chelsea are going to cause City any issues. I do think City will probably destroy them, based on the talent that is out on the pitch. But also there's a bit of infighting going on at Chelsea at the moment. I saw Jackson having a mad go at Enzo Fernandez for a wayward pass. He was throwing his arms around all over the place. I do not like Jackson at all. Jackson even managed to get himself yellow carded when he was on the bench. Another yellow card for that lad. I don't know how he keeps doing it. I saw Thiago Silva having a go at Ben Chilwell. There was a bit of infighting going on, and that is not at all the kind of headspace that Chelsea need to be in heading into such a big match. But they do have enough quality out there in and around the place where they could pose a few problems to City, and so I think Pep will start one of his strongest sides, which will include KDB. So I think KDB will start, and unless City absolutely smash Chelsea and they're up like 3 or 4-0, I think KDB probably stays on the pitch for the full 90 minutes. He might come off around the 70 or 80 minute mark if they're up, say, comfortably 2-0, 3-0, or better, somewhere like that. He might get some reduced minutes, but if that is the case, then the points have already been scored, and hopefully KDB is already in amongst the returns. In the Brentford fixture, we've actually very recently seen how Pep does set up to counter the low block of Brentford. So if you are not at all familiar with how Brentford set up against the top teams, they basically put a flat 5 across the back, a 3-man tight narrow midfield sitting a few yards in front of the back 5, and then 2 strikers in front of them in a bit of a Christmas tree shape. It basically puts 8 defenders in and around the 18-yard box or within a very short distance, which congests the midfield and makes it quite hard to play around. Now, how Pep has countered this in the game in game week 23? Yeah, in game week 23, when they last played Brentford just a couple of game weeks ago, he actually played Gvardiol as the man who was getting quite far forward to join the 4 men in behind Haaland, to give 5 men sitting in behind Haaland to help deal with the 8 men that Brentford set up with. So he basically just floods all the City men forward, requires a whole bunch of intricate passing and a lot of movement. Last time they started, Foden, De Bruyne, Alvarez, and I think it was Bernardo Silva out on the right, where Bernardo Silva just basically held the touchline or held the width, and Gvardiol was coming up very high on the left. Now, Gvardiol is injured at the moment, and so we might see like a Bernardo Silva maybe out on the left, or maybe a Doku out on the left with Grealish injured, and potentially Kyle Walker getting up very high on the right-hand side. But I'm pretty sure he will still sit 5 men in behind Haaland, and he does need 3 really good attacking cam players, central attacking midfield players, in order to do this, which basically, in my eyes, assures the starts of De Bruyne, Foden, and Alvarez, for all of you Alvarez owners out there, in that Brentford fixture. So I think De Bruyne starts both matches, probably plays 90 minutes in both matches as well, unless of course there is some sort of blowout of the scoreline in either match, and if that is the case, then KDB would have been on the pitch when those goals were going in, and so he has a pretty high upside chance of returning points this game week. But of course I'm not going to be selling Kevin De Bruyne. The only other option aside from Diogo Jota is indeed Saka. Now, Saka has a great fixture this weekend away to Burnley, and he also plays in game week 26. So if I was to sell him for Salah, they both have 2 games across the next 2 game weeks. Obviously Salah with a double and then a blank, and Saka with just a single and a single. But it would mean that I'd be opting out of Saka versus Burnley, but also I would actually be losing quite a lot of value in selling Saka, and I would probably have to fork out that money in future in order to bring Saka back into my squad. He's playing really well. Arsenal have been putting together a lot more decent attack of late, and with his massive amount of EO, I do not think I would be going against Saka for too long, and so it would be a value hit and avoiding that Burnley fixture, and so it just does not at all make sense in my team. So it really only is Diogo Jota that could be the make way for Salah. So what do we do if Klopp says that Salah is either ready to start the Brentford fixture, i.e. he's going to be on the team sheet, or if he confirms that he'll be on the bench for that first match against Brentford? Now, some considerations that we should probably take into account here, some of which I may have already gone over slightly earlier in this video, but first of all, like I've mentioned, with Salah absent, Jota is nailed, and what I see to be is the biggest goal threat in the Liverpool team. However, if Salah is fit, then Jota, Darwin and Diaz minutes all become a much bigger risk. So, if Salah is on the bench against Brentford, that means he is fit enough to play. Managers do not put players on the bench unless they could actually get out onto the pitch, because those bench spots are limited and they would only put people there that could actually run out onto the pitch. And if he is on the bench, then that would be in order to bring Salah on later in the match, say around the 60 or 70 minute mark, which would give Salah 20 to 30 minutes in that Brentford fixture. It would also mean that either Jota, Darwin or Diaz would be subbed off at that point in order to get Salah out onto the pitch. Now, there's also a value consideration to evaluate here in buying Salah in game week 25, assuming that we do get word that he is available for the Brentford fixture. It does mean that I would be able to buy Salah for the cheapest price that I could pick him up for the rest of the season, assuming, of course, that Salah doesn't go and get injured again and obviously incurs some price drops as a result of that injury. But if Haaland is anything to go by, now Haaland was down at 13.9 million before he appeared for the last 19 minutes against Burnley in the game week 22. If I scroll out to the right, you can see he was down at 13.9 million. He then very quickly shot up to 14.1 million and then again up to 14.3 million for game week 24, and he is now already up again to 14.4 million. So he's actually had a 0.5 million increase since he has been back available in the game. Now, Salah is just as big of an asset as Haaland, and so there is every chance that if I do not buy Salah in game week 25, I obviously won't be buying him in game week 26 for his blank. Well, probably would be buying him for the blank in game week 26. I suppose there could be a consideration there to bring him in if he was going to shoot up and out of reach. But it'd actually be more likely that I'd be waiting until game week 27 or beyond in order to bring Salah in, and he could, well, easily be up by an extra 0.5 million at that point. So he's currently listed at 13.0 million. An extra 0.5 million is quite a lot, especially if I want to be fitting him in alongside Haaland and De Bruyne. And so picking him up in game week 25 would actually, or could potentially, save me quite a bit of value for the remaining 14 game weeks of the season. Now, the only other consideration that I should probably bring up here is if I do bring Salah into my squad. Now, I'll bring up a transfer planner here. Just reset that. So this is my team, roughly be lining up something like this. Let's say Salah is coming in this week with my one free transfer in game week 25, only leaves me 0.2 million in the bank. And then in game week 26, Salah does blank. Obviously, Diogo Jota would also blank in game week 26. However, the key difference here is if I bring in Salah in game week 25, I wouldn't be selling him in game week 26. I'd actually have to hold him through the blank, because selling him would obviously incur that value hit that I've just talked about, but also it would be additional transfers to get him out and get him back in again in game week 27 or beyond. And so my game week 26 side, with only one free transfer in the bank, would likely roll out like this, and I would actually only be playing with 10 men. I could look to make a defensive transfer in order to sell Pedro Porro or Gusto in order to field an 11 men and bench the other one alongside Palmer and Salah. But I don't really fancy making any defensive transfers at the moment. I kind of also want to hold on to Porro for a little bit, as he does play in game week 29, and Gusto's down at 4.1 million, or that's what I bought him in for, and so it's not a hell of a lot of options with the 0.2 million in the bank. So if I do buy Salah in game week 25, basically means that I will be playing with 10 men in game week 26. However, playing with 10 men in game week 26 does mean that I will bank that one free transfer, which could be very helpful in order to set up for Bournemouth or Luton's double game week 28, or to help deal with the big blank in game week 29 once we know the results from the 5th round of the FA Cup. So the options laid in front of me really comes down to, if Salah is on the bench, now obviously this does rely on some information coming out of the press conferences or potentially some early team leaks and Salah being available, but if that is the case, I can either hold Jota and run the minutes risk for the last parts of the Brentford game, because Salah will be subbed on for either Jota, Darwin or Diaz, who knows, as well as running the minutes risk on Jota for the all-important Luton fixture, then take a 1 week punt in game week 26 to sell Diogo Jota to have 11 out onto the pitch in game week 26, and then buy a much more expensive Salah in game week 27 or beyond. So that's one path that my team could go down. Or I could buy a very cheap Salah for game week 25, hold him through the blank in game week 26 playing with 10 men, but be one transfer up to use in preparation for game week or double game week 28 or blank game week 29. So those are the two options, assuming that Salah is on the bench. Now, if we hear from Klopp that Salah is ready to start against Brentford, this becomes an absolute no-brainer for me. I'll jump on a very cheap Salah, locking in that price, and have him as a massive differential over the field for a pretty decent looking double, albeit a little bit tough considering Brentford aren't really easy to score against. But not many managers are going to be able to bring Salah in, as it will probably cost a couple of transfers and maybe some hits in order to accommodate him alongside Haaland. So I will be stoked if I hear that Salah is starting in game week 25, and I will very quickly make that move, locking in that 13.0 million price point. Now, if the second scenario is, of course, if Salah is confirmed to be available for Brentford, or basically we find out that he's on the bench for the Brentford match. So this will mean that Salah will almost certainly get 20 to 30 minutes at the end of the Brentford game, and I'm picking that he will probably also get the 90 minutes against Luton 4 days later. Now, Salah hasn't actually been injured for too long. He picked up his injury in the African Cup of Nations, and so his match fitness will be pretty decent. And so it's really only him just getting over the hamstring injury, and I could quite easily see a 20 to 30 minute performance from Brentford and then 90 minutes out of Luton, totaling 120 minutes across two fixtures. Now, if Luton was a single game week and Salah was deemed fit and ready to start that Luton match, I think many managers would be talking about getting him in, probably even for hits, in order to potentially captain him if this wasn't a double game week. Now, because this is a double game week and pretty much everyone is set on triple captaining Haaland, or a very big majority of managers are looking to triple captain Haaland this week. I myself have already turned the chip on. There isn't much focus on Salah out in the community, even though I think he should warrant careful consideration even without the option of captaincy. Now, on the captaincy, there is no way that I'll be captaining Salah ahead of a 90-minute nailed-on Haaland with two great fixtures. So the captaincy is actually out of the question, out of the equation here. Even if Salah does start, or is, we do hear that he is ready to start for that Brentford match, there is a small chance that he does reoccur that injury, and the amount of firepower that Man City are putting forward against Chelsea and Brentford, I think Haaland just absolutely smashes it across this double. So Haaland is definitely my locked-in captain, irrelevant of whether or not Salah does start both fixtures in the double. But Salah could do so much damage in any minutes that he gets across these two fixtures. He should be well within consideration for a lot of managers out there, especially for that all-important Luton game, which is the second game in the double. Would anyone be surprised if Salah got a hat-trick in that Luton fixture? I mean, I wouldn't. So having a Salah with a hat-trick as a big differential in game week 25 would be a massive rank increase if that was in fact the way that it plays out this weekend. So if I find out that Salah is available for Brentford, even if he's on the bench, it means that I will be selling Diogo Jota for Salah, rolling the dice on one of the top two players in the game, with not many managers out there being able to get to Salah, making him an uncharacteristically massive differential in this double game week. So I will be glued to the press conferences and the early team leak accounts on Twitter come deadline this weekend. Alright, that wraps up this video. So remember to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And until next time, I'll catch you again shortly. Cheers.